Yeah. All right, we're back to part two of our study on bitachon. Bitachon, we're going to be translating as trust. Bitachon could also come from the Hebrew word certainty. The way in Hebrew, when a person is sure of something, they say betach, for sure, certainly. So bitachon is going to be the key word over here. We're learning the gates of trust, trust in God. But just some of the background that I already gave last week, but just to summarize a little bit of what we said last week, for those that either weren't here or couldn't listen to the recording, the Shar Habitachon is part of a bigger book that was written in the 11th century, or I guess 12th century, by Rabbi. So it's almost 1,000 years old, this book. And it was written by Rabbeinu Bechai or Rabbeinu Bachi. He was a great rabbi that lived in Spain. It was actually written in the Judeo-Arabic language. The book was called Duties of the Heart, Hovat Halavavot. In that book, he has 10 gates, 10 sections that talk about the different obligations that are not action-based, or behavioral based, which is the majority of our mitzvot of the Torah. There's do's and there's don'ts. And most of everything we know, definitely up until that point, was all about the do's and don'ts. And that's actually essential to Judaism. What do we do and what we don't do? But little was spoken about what's on the heart, what's obligated on our heart. That's not an action or not a speech, but it was something more in the heart. And he goes through 10 gates, 10 parts that are duties on the heart. And our gate, Shar Bitachon, is going to be the fourth gate of the 10. We spoke about last week the difference between emuna versus bitachon. Emuna means belief, or I believe in God. That's faith. Bitachon is much, much deeper. It runs a lot deeper. It's much more internal. It's trust. And like I said, a certainty. You could have emuna without bitachon, which means you could believe in God, but not have trust in God. But you can't have vice versa. You can't trust in God, but not have belief in God. We gave the example of Nachmanides last week that he gives an example of a tree and its fruit. You could have a tree without fruit, but you can't have fruit without a tree. So the tree is going to be that emuna, that faith or that belief in God. So this book is not so much about believing in God. We're taking there's different books that you could learn about believing in God. But this book is taking as a given that we're coming to this book with a belief in God, but the belief remains somewhat elusive or somewhat external. Because it says even as we are born with a natural belief in God, but not a trust in God. Which means just the famous example given in the Talmud, I'll say it in the Aramaic and then translate it is Ganva apumachtarta rachmana karya, which means a thief who's on the threshold of a home that he's about to rob. He takes a moment and he calls out to God and he says, God, help me be successful in my mission. So he's believing in God, but it's a very external level of belief, because obviously if he really felt deeply about God, he wouldn't be doing what he's about to do. So it remains somewhat makif, it remains somewhat elusive or external. Bitachon is about internalizing, is that if I believe in God, I now trust that everything God does is for my best. So therefore, it's much more real. Whereas belief in God doesn't take much work. I could believe in God. It even says it. We could say we could believe in God, and I could believe that God created me. But if you still have anxiety, you don't have trust in God.
Comes to Latofa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To see that everything is actually for my best. So a person could have emuna, which is belief in God, but still be worried about what they experience because they don't have trust in God. When you have bitachon, which is trust in God, it touches you so deeply, and therefore, with everything that occurs around you, you're tranquil. That's going to be the first, what we started learning last week, is it's almost like the symptom the way you know if you have bitachon is if you are calm when things could be turbulent around you. Because ultimately, God is having you trust that God has my back and everything that I need. The first line of what we learned last week, and if you have the book, it's literally the first line, um, are placing our trust in God alone. That's like before the author even starts, that's the first word he starts with, on placing our trust in God alone. And I don't think I emphasized it enough, but
What page
it was
is that?
the top of page 2.
Thank you.
And you don't have to see it so much inside, but we discussed it last week. The main point of that line is really summing up the introduction here, is that trust is that you put your trust in God alone. If you have breads in different baskets, so you trust in God, but you'll also trust in the stock market. That's not trust. So trust means that you're trusting in God alone, that He's the only power. Um, but if you trust in something else also, then it's not bitachon. So of course you trust your spouse, you trust your children, you trust your parents, you trust your colleagues, you could trust your employees or your employer. We're not saying that if you trust them, you're lacking in trust in God, but trusting in God means that ultimately the power of everything lies with God. And we're going to get to it a little more. But this is something that I was researching to try to add a little more summary here. I didn't explain this last week. So I do want to just get into it. 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. I just want to get into it now. There's a great debate, one of the most fiercest debates in our Jewish history, was about God's supervision over the world. In Hebrew, it's called hashgacha. If you ever heard of a mashgiach is a supervisor at making sure things are kosher, whether in a kitchen, at an event, or for any food product being made kosher. They have to have a mashgiach, which is a supervisor overseeing the process. So the question about God's supervision, hashgacha, is how personal or how intimate is this hashgacha? Is it hashgacha klalit, more just of a general, or is it hashgacha pratis, or is it much more individual? Is it general oversight or more individual? Many people, many authorities, Torah authorities, from hundreds of years ago, dating back even further, were of the opinion that there's hashgacha klalit over the general world, over us, humans. There's more personal, but over the general world, it's more a general oversight, a general overview that God has over the world, which means the example given is God has the hashgacha that, let's say, an animal, this certain species of animal won't go extinct. So whatever man may try to do to make this animal go extinct, it won't happen because God has his supervision to make sure that this species of animal won't go extinct. But if it's going to be through this animal or through that animal, that's not so much in God's supervision, which means every detail of what the animal does is not so much, it's more of a general hashgacha that God has over that species to make sure it stays and doesn't go extinct. That's what hashgacha klalit would mean. Hashgacha pratit, which is one of the famous teachings of the Baal Shem Tov of Chassidus, is that everything is all part of the master plan, which means the example given is when a leaf falls off a tree in an island where no one sees it, and it turns 6 times before falling to the ground, even that was part of the master plan. Hashgacha pratis over everything in the world. So these two seem to be kind of contradicting, either hashgacha klalis or hashgacha pratit, or the more divine orchestration that's much more individual and personal. So the Rebbe actually explains that they actually go together. One is not contradicting the other. there's certainly hashgacha pratis. According to the Rebbe, everyone holds there is divine orchestration to the detail. God is overseeing everything. The question is, how much of that divine orchestration are we privy to see? How much of that divine orchestration would we appreciate, and is it revealed to us that we could say, I understand it? So the way the Rebbe understands it, based on Shar Habitachon, and again, Shar Habitachon was written almost 1,000 years ago. It's one of the foundational teachings of Torah that the Rebbe, already from the 50s, and even earlier, before the Rebbe was even Rebbe, the Rebbe wanted people to learn this, and it's literally a life transformation. It's a transforming book. It changes your view on life, knowing that God is not only I believe in God, but I trust in God, which is a much deeper level, and therefore I'm calm because everything is in God's hands. That, based on the Rebbe's understanding, is whatever happens, if you have trust in God, you will see more of God's direct supervision. The less you put your trust in God, God is still supervising everything, but the less I will be able to see and appreciate of God's divine supervision. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that you don't see it as much, which is one of the consequences of galut, which is divine concealment, that we don't see things so clearly. We don't see God's hands and the reason behind things, but the more, or we don't see God's hands in so many things we do. The more we put our trust in God, the more God says, okay, you're putting your trust in me. I will show you the my hand in everything. So that's actually the first line of the book, which is really a key when the mechaber, the author, says Habitachon al ho'elakim yitzbarech levado, that placing our trust in God alone. What it's saying is, if you put your trust, 90% of your trust in God, but then 10% of your trust you're putting in the stock market, that's not trust. To explain it a little more, it's not saying don't research the stock market. It's not, let's say, God forbid, if a person has to go for a medical procedure, we're not saying don't care who the doctor is because you put your trust in God. Of course, care, but realize that that's what God wants you to do, to find the best doctor and to make sure it's done at the appropriate time after getting a second opinion and whatever else needs to happen. Do your research. But once you're being wheeled into the operating room, realize at that point that you put your trust in God, meaning 100% of your trust is in God. Even by getting the best doctor, that's still trusting in God to have the best emissaries to do his job. And that they are just like a tool, and the tools that the doctor uses, it's all part of your trust in God that it's going to be the best. Any person with seichel knows that if you're trying to get a meeting with a big CEO because you're looking for a job, or you're trying to get a meeting so they could give a big donation to Chabad, you have to be nice to the secretary, because a lot of times the secretary is the one that's going to let you in. But you would be foolish to think that the secretary has control. The secretary is someone you have to be polite to and you have to be nice to. But if you put your trust, let's say, to use an analogy from baseball, where we just had the World Series last week, it's not the bat that is doing the job, it's the player. Of course, the player has to use the tool or the hockey stick or whatever else that's doing that's making it happen, but the success is not coming from the baseball bat. So as much as people are autographing the baseball or the baseball bat or the hockey stick, you're losing track of what really is happening in the game. It's the player. So the same as also, if you're putting your trust in the doctor over putting your trust in God, that's not trust anymore. 90% trust in God is not trust. To say I have 20% trust in something else, that means you're not trusting in God. So the opening line of the Shar Habitachon is really, I think, a very, very powerful line. The trust in God has to be in God alone. That's ultimately going to be the point. It's so easy to say and yet so hard to do. So like I said at the beginning, it's so easy, not easy, but it's natural to believe in God. But it's a major workout and a lifelong process, which is what we're going to be studying in Shar Habitachon, to trust in God. Belief we could all have. Even that thief that I told you before has belief in God. But trust in God is a major, major workout. That there's one power in the world, and in the earlier year, in the beginning of after the flood, by that time there was major idol worshiping going on, and it says that those idol worshipers they believed in God. They just believed that God gave over power to the sun, which is somewhat true, right? We have solar power. God gave this incredible energy through the sun and through the moon. So they lost track of God and says, you know what? All of our success is coming from the sun. We'll put our eggs in that basket. So they lost trust in God by putting it in other things. Okay, so what we started learning last week is 10 benefits. The first one, and I think the most important, is going to be the feeling of tranquility we have when we trust in God. We feel calm. We feel a sense of serenity. While that's a benefit, the Mechaber, the author over here, is not telling us to trust in God because of the benefit. It's almost like proof. How do you know when you truly trust in God? Is when you are in a place of tranquility. But the whole premise of this book is we're serving God, which was the previous duty of the heart, was to realize that our whole purpose is in service of God. And a true servant is not serving their master for a reward. A true servant is serving their master for the sake of their master. So once we are serving God, we'll get benefits. That's a proof that we know that we're serving God genuinely, but we don't do it in order for the sake of the reward. That's counter everything what we're learning in the book about trust. We don't trust in God for the sake of what he gives us. We trust in God because we believe and we know that ultimately God is in charge. And a key thing of the book is going to be the more we trust in God, the more we see God's divine blessings. And the less we trust in God, it's not like God is punishing us, but it's more a consequence. God says, if you're putting your trust in the doctor, by all means, go ahead. If you put your trust in God, God says, okay, I'm in charge. You'll see the blessings. So if you want to truly see the blessings, it's about putting our trust 100% in Hashem.
So can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So when Moshe hit the rock,
yeah,
and he was basically banished from going into the land of Israel,
yeah,
is it because he didn't put his full trust in Hashem?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's even an earlier story, and I think I shared it last week, where we learn about trusting God from what Moshe did not do, which was at the beginning of the right after Moshe is born, when he was a young man still. One of the most famous lines and teachings of the Rebbe is when Moshe killed an Egyptian who was trying to kill a Jew, and then he sees the next day two Jews fighting, and he tells them stop. And the story is that they said, "Are you going to kill us like you did to the Egyptian?" And the verse says Moshe feared and says, "Oh, the matter is known," which means it could get back to Pharaoh. And then the next line is Pharaoh heard, tried to kill Moshe, Moshe fled to Midian. So the Rebbe has such a beautiful teaching is, why would the verse tell us what was in Moshe's heart? That's not a part of the story. Like it's irrelevant to the story of what was going on in Moshe's heart. The important part of the story is that Pharaoh heard. So the Rebbe learns that it's because of what was going on in Moshe's heart, because of Moshe's lack of trust in God, where he feared that the matter would get known. That's how the matter got known, because he didn't have a full level of trust in God. So God says, okay, you're not fully going to trust in me. Let the matter play out. And that's where Pharaoh ended up hearing it. So it's an incredible lesson of our work and trying on it's not that we're always going to be there. We're not. But we're trying to work towards it. Let's see, what other notes do I have here?
So I have a question on that
Sure.
note then.
Yeah.
So it's like God gave Moshe another chance. It's like, okay, your time isn't right yet for you to do the work. you need to go to the backside of the desert for 40 years. You're not prepared. This is clearly you have some leadership skills, but um, they need to be mentored through, you know, whoever, and, you know, maybe his father-in-law and chasing sheep and whatever. And then, so would you say that this is showing that time wasn't ripe for Moshe, that it's still, he didn't not have a calling, he had a calling from the beginning, but this was a demonstration. Yeah, it's just not the right time.
I don't know if I would say it that way, because for sure Moshe's calling was exactly what God wanted from him at that time, meaning he was the greatest Jewish leader, but his greatest calling was to instill that trust within the Jewish people. And we were definitely lacking in it. I mean, just look at the story of the Jews in Egypt, how much 4/5 of the people didn't even go out. They didn't have any trust in God. So I think Moshe's main job is to reinforce that trust that he worked on, to reinforce it within us so that we would be ready to go into Israel. I mean, definitely there's a lot to talk about on that topic, but definitely exactly what happened was exactly what needed to happen. Um, One of the main things the Zohar teaches us about Moshe is his job was instilling that faith and trust within the Jewish people. And Moshe learned that from an earlier age. And therefore, during the 40 years, he was nurturing that faith within the Jews, meaning trying to take it from a more general level that we already had to something more internal and more that we use when things get tough. Okay, so the big question that the Shar Habitachon, the gates of trust, is trying to answer is how do we get there? That's going to be starting from chapter 1. How do we get that trust? How do we nurture and reveal that trust within us? How do we develop that trust? But the introduction is before we learn how to get it, we just have to define what the trust is and why it's so important that we have it. So that's really, it's a long introduction. We just started last week. I'm in no rush because I want to enjoy every line of this. Um, and that's really where we're going to be taking us today. I have us on page 4, where we're learning about 10 benefits. And I'm not going to reiterate this all the time, but I'm just going to tell you again that if the point is to trust in God alone, we're not doing it for a benefit. Because once you're doing it for a benefit, it's not trusting in God, it's doing it for another motive. Trusting in God means trusting in God alone. So it's almost like these benefits that we're talking about, it's proof that we have trust in God. Like the first benefit is when a person is tranquil, when a person has menucha, when a person is in a place that is serene, that's how you know that your trust is real. It's not that you're trusting in God in order so you could live with more tranquility. It's more that when you trust in God, you'll see that tranquility play out in your life. Um, and that's where we are up to. I think there was one other point that I wanted to mention, but it's not coming to me now. So with that, we'll go inside. I'm going to be sharing the screen. It's okay if you don't have the book because I'm going to be sharing my screen. It's directly from Chabad.org. It's a beautiful book, and like Robin was saying before, the even the cover is beautiful, but the inside of the teachings inside the translation, I think, is very well done. Let me just find that. Uh, Guys, I just have to pull it up. There we go. All right. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so we're going to start all the way from the top of page 4. Among the benefits, and I hope that's zoomed in enough. in the book, there's above the line, and then there's commentary below the line. In the online text, it's all kind of interwoven together. The shaded areas, the boxes, are kind of those commentaries, and in between. I'm kind of tempted to not go through all the commentaries and maybe just pick one or two of them, just that we could keep the book going. If any of you see a commentary that really stands out, you're welcome to bring it out. I'm going to read a few of them, but not all of them. And part of this we already read last week, so we're just going to go a little bit quickly. Among the Torah benefits, and basically there's 5 spiritual benefits, and there's going to be 5 practical benefits. And we started with the Torah benefits, the spiritual benefits. So among the Torah benefits of having this trust in God is tranquility of the soul, which is free of worry as a result of this reliance on God, just as a servant bound to place his trust in his master. In the next few paragraphs, the author will illustrate how only a person who relies on God can be truly free of worry and have a peaceful state of mind. Just skips that. For a person who does not place his trust in God, places his trust in an entity other than God. If a person does not place his trust in God to take care of him, he is de facto placing his trust in an entity other than God. And I just love this idea, because a person could say, you know what, I don't trust in anything. That's impossible. I think that's going to be a main point over here, where a person naturally puts their trust in something. You may put it in a person, you may put it in your bank account, you'll put it in your work, you'll put it in the stock market, but a person puts their trust in something or someone. So by de facto, if a person is not putting their trust in God, they're putting their trust in something else. I'm just going to skip the commentary again. If a person places his trust in something other than God, then God removes his divine providence from him and leaves him in the hands of the entity in which he placed his trust. So, one thing I was researching over here that I found amazing, in this book in general, he doesn't bring so many sources from the Torah to prove his point. But yet over here, he's going to bring, I think, 5 sources or something from different parts of the Torah to prove this point. Again, the point is that if you're not putting your trust in God, you're putting your trust in something else. And then God says, if you're putting your trust in something else, by all means, go ahead. So it's almost like God is removing his, or the way we learned it from the Rebbe is, you won't see God's divine blessing directly if you're putting your trust in something else, which is a very heavy statement. So as a result, he brings 5 sources to bring this point out, because it's a very big statement to say. So therefore, he needs to back it up with a bunch of sources from the Torah. So the author will now quote 5 verses that show how, number 1, person who doesn't rely on God must be relying on some other entity. And number 2, which is going to be a really heavy point, by doing so, he causes God to remove his divine providence from him. And the bottom line from a commentary was, why choose anxiety if you could choose tranquility? And therefore choose bitachon, which is a beautiful thing, but we have to see how to get there. And that's going to be an important point. So let's just bring the sources. And the person who places his trust in something other than God will be like one regarding whom it is said in Jeremiah, for my people have committed 2 things. Number 1, they have forsaken me, the spring of living waters, to dig for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that do not hold water. So I'm just going to read the commentary to explain it. This verse implies that a person who does not put his trust in God is automatically placing his trust in an entity other than God. Secondly, it implies that just as the broken cistern does not hold water, he will eventually lose the blessings because it's broken. So this is a source for the concept advanced by the author that God's divine providence is removed from those who don't rely on him. And again, I want to reiterate just one more time. According to Chassidus, it can't be that God's divine providence is removed, because according to Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, it's always there. It's just that you don't see God's divine providence as clearly as when you have your trust in God. So bottom line, it would be rely on God and his providence. Back on the top of the book, or just in the text that I'm about to read. If you're looking in the book, we're on page 6, I think.
Yes.
Perfect. And as the verse says, they exchange their glory for the likeness of an ox eating grass. This verse refers to the time when the Jews worshiped the golden calf, substituting God for the image of a grass-eating ox. In subsequent verses, it states that God was ready to destroy the Jewish nation as a punishment, were it not for the fact that Moses interceded on behalf. So here too, we see that as a result of the Jews substituting God with another entity, God was ready to remove his providence and destroy him. So here are two sources, this being the second source from the book of Psalms of King David, that when they put they substituted God with an ox, with a golden calf, that's when God removed his providence. And as the verse says, another verse over here, for this is from Jeremiah again, blessed is the man who relies on the Lord, and the Lord will be his support. Actually, in Hebrew, the word is miftacho, which is the same word of betach, of bitachon. This verse assures that if we have trust in God, we will be protected by him, but it also implies that if we lack trust, we will not be protected. And as it says, another verse from Psalms, fortunate is the man who made the Lord his support and did not turn to the haughty and those who turn to falsehood. The verse praises the person who relies on God rather than turning to others. In this verse, we also see that there is a straightforward choice: either rely on God or on another entity. There is no middle ground. And that itself, I just want to pause here for a second, because this is, it gets into the duties of the heart. I think it's a very harsh statement to say, and therefore I just want to explain it. When it comes to mitzvot, there's 613 mitzvot. Of course, our goal is to try to fulfill as many as we can, but we know we slip up. We know we don't fulfill all of them. And the goal is to keep on going. But a key thing over here, I think that we're saying from Shar Habitachon is that if you have your trust in God and in God alone, you don't have your trust in other things. But naturally, if you don't put your full trust in God, you are putting your trust in other things. And if you do that, you're removing that divine hashgacha pratis, or at least based on the words of the Rebbe, you're not removing it, you just don't see it. It's concealed from you. So a person who puts 60% of their trust in God and 40% of their trust in a doctor, it's not that you obviously have to research and get the right doctor, but ultimately you realize that the doctor is just the messenger of God, and that it's really coming from Hashem. And therefore you're in a place of tranquility, knowing that you have the best doctor, that God put in, God gave the tools, the ability, and the skill to be able to heal. But the healing is really coming from God. That's full trust in God. And when you don't put your full trust in God, God says, okay, you're removing your trust from me. I'm going to remove that. What you could see is the direct blessing.
So when people committed the sin with the golden calf,
Yeah.
and Hashem talked about obliterating the people,
Yeah.
and Moshe for stepping aside, so he could do that. Would you say Moshe wasn't putting his full trust in Hashem?
Moshe for sure was.
Yeah,
I know Moshe.
yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
So I'm just trying. I'm actually
The Jews weren't, right?
Yeah.
They went for the golden calf.
right, and so yeah, of course the Jews weren't. But Moshe, instead of saying yes to Hashem, whatever you want to do, that's okay with me. He actually stood up for the people. So he kind of do you know what I'm saying? He kind of went head to head with Hashem.
Yeah.
Instead
You're saying,
back.
you're saying if he had trust, he would just say, well, God, whatever you want.
Yes.
Got it.
I'm thinking about Noah. We're in Noah right now,
Yeah.
right? And so Noah actually did whatever Hashem said, and he really didn't look out for
Right. And that was a negative, right? So Moshe, one of the greatest compliments Moshe ever got is standing up for the Jewish people, even when God said, please step aside and let me take care of the people. So I think that's actually part of the beauty of trust in God, is God actually wanted Moshe. That's what teshuvah is. Teshuvah is, I messed up, and yet God is asking me to return. what Moshe was able to understand is that he was able to see that even when things seem like they're bad, there's God trusts in us to come back. Like I don't like I like for me, I don't see it as a contradiction at all. The Jews definitely messed up and
Yes.
Moshe had to defend them. But trusting in God doesn't mean that you're just gonna say yes to whatever God says. We Moshe questioned God over and over with the story of the Jews suffering in Egypt, and that actually wasn't even a negative of Moshe. Like I think that's part of our trust in God is we're trusting you so much. How could you allow this to happen? And we see that all the way to the last verse of the Torah. God actually thanked Moshe for what he did by breaking the tablets and causing the teshuvah to come as a result. It brought an even greater strength within the Jewish people and our trust in God.
Then you think about the Akita and how there's full trust in
Yeah,
Hashem.
very good.
So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Okay, so one more verse over here. Um, Fortunate is the man. We said that. No, up to this one. And as it says in Psalms, fortunate is the man who made the Lord his support. We did that one. Okay, fine. And as it says in Jeremiah, cursed is the man who relies in man and makes flesh his arm, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. So you see, if you're relying in man, you're turning away from the Lord. This verse teaches us that bad things befall a person who relies on other people rather than on God, supporting the author's original statement that God removes his divine providence from those who do not trust in him. So that's section one of this introduction. But now we're going to go to misguided trust. If you're looking in the book, it's the last paragraph in on page 7. Until now, the author has been explaining in general terms that when a person relies on anything other than God, he is doomed to fail. Now the author brings specific examples of things that people tend to place their trust in, do not provide security. So let me just take away the Hebrew to make it wider. Here we go. If he relies on his wisdom, his schemes, his physical strength, and his own efforts, those efforts will be for naught. He will become weak and lose that physical strength, and his schemes and wisdom will fall short of accomplishing his goals. As the verse says from Job, he traps clever people in their shrewdness. This verse is cited as proof that man cannot rely on his plans, however shrewd they may be. I do want to read this commentary because it brings a beautiful teaching from the Rebbe. So the author just said, Rabbeinu Bechai just said, if he relies on his wisdom, his physical strength, and his own efforts. So just a commentary. If you're looking inside, it's going to be the bottom of page 9. No, sorry, at the bottom of page 7, where he says like this: although we must not rely on our wisdom and efforts to achieve our goals to earn a living, we can and should utilize our strength and abilities because they are the vehicle that God gave to achieve success. We must simply be aware that blessings and success ultimately come from God and that it is God who ordains blessings through the channel of human effort. So it's not saying take away your human effort because you fully trust in God, is use your human efforts, but realize and be aware that it comes from God. The sages explain that we are biblically mandated to work, expounded on the verse, and God will bless you in all that you do. Sifri states, Sifri is a beautiful commentary on the Torah, that the person might think that he can sit idle and do nothing. Therefore, the verse teaches us in all that you do, meaning you got to do the work. In fact, in chapter 4 of the Gate of Trust, which is where we're learning, the author writes, with a clear conviction that his affairs are given over to the decree of the Creator may be exalted, he must at the same time pursue means beneficial to him and choose what appears to him to be the best course of action in that manner. Meaning, part of trusting in God is also putting in the effort and doing the work so that the trust of God, so that the blessing from God could materialize. So, bottom line of that is utilize your abilities and strengths because it is your God-given vehicle for success.
Rabbi.
Okay, yeah.
So, two really quick comments. I think our nation is pretty good on the work part, or many of us, but we're not so good on recognizing that our gifts come from God and they're for the purpose of service, because we think, oh, okay, so we can work hard and get a car, a house, a good job, a good income, a good bank account, but then we don't use that beyond that. It's like you were saying, a vehicle or a tool. And I think that's what the beauty of this is. It's emphasizing for the purpose of.
Exactly. Yep. So we're definitely good on the first part of doing the work. And then when it comes to recognizing where the source is, I agree with you. We're lacking on it. And I think this is going to be the clear goal, is to realize where it's coming from. And I don't know, look, Lynn, like one of the main symptoms we see is people have so much and think, oh, we work so hard and people are blessed with a lot. And yet there's so much lacking in their life. There's so much anxiety and there's so much fear, even when they have so much. And I think the beauty over here is when we put our reliance and trust in God, first of all, we'll see the blessings, but also we'll be able to live a more wholesome life without a fear of something else. So see it inside. Beautiful. And as it is said, so this is from the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, I returned and saw under the sun that the race does not belong to the swift, nor the war to the mighty, and the wise do not have bread. This is from chapter 9 of Koheles. It would be expected that those who are physically strong would win the war. This verse shows that physical strength and intelligence cannot be relied on for success.
I like the next one because I think of the Birkat Hamazon,
Right.
young lions. Yeah.
Yep. So the next verse is from, we say it in Birkat Hamazon, in the grace after meals, and it is said, young lions suffer want and are hungry, but those who seek the Lord do not lack any good. The young lions in the verse refers to people who rely on their strength. The verse teaches that they are destined to be poor and hungry. On the other hand, those who seek God, meaning those who rely on God, will not lack any goodness. From the above verses, meaning from the Psalms and from Ecclesiastes, from David and from his son Solomon, we see that a person cannot rely on his own talents for his success. Only a person who relies on God is guaranteed to be taken care of. And I think that word guaranteed is a heavy word, and it's something we're going to be unpacking as the book develops. Having discussed how a person who relies on his own talents will not be successful, the author now turns to address a person who relies on his wealth. And if he relies on his abundance of wealth, it will be removed from him and left to someone else. The author now quotes verses that illustrate the transitory nature of wealth. And as the verse states, a rich man lies down with his wealth intact. He opens his eyes, and it is no longer his. Similarly, the verse says, do not toil to become wealthy. From your own understanding, desist. You have to understand the verse a little better. Do not toil to become wealthy. Okay, I don't fully understand that verse, but let's continue. And the next verse, so I guess from Proverbs, from Solomon, says, do not toil. But the next verse says, before you can set your eyes on it, it is gone. Similarly, it says, at a young age, his wealth will leave him, and at his end, he will be a disgrace. At a young age, it will leave him. So the commentary says, while this verse refers to a person who obtains his wealth dishonestly, the author quotes it as yet another source for a transitory nature of wealth. So definitely it proves that point that it's transitory, but I don't understand the verse, do not toil to become wealthy. From your own understanding, desist.
Could it be what is considered me osher? Like, who is the wealthy one? What do we consider wealth? What is the good life? What is the success that we're all shooting for, working so hard for? And maybe it's redefining what is wealth, success, good life.
Yeah, okay, cool. But what does it mean, do not toil? Meaning you're saying the wealth over here is
If you're just working for your own bank account,
right. That's
then
not
that is not true wealth. That
got it.
is closer to greed or fear or just making sure you're okay, but not seeing the bigger picture. So that if you don't see, you're maybe doing it for the wrong reasons. And if you can see it from God's perspective and the blessing that he'll give you, um, then it turns out well, even though you can't account for it, because you're focused on him. That would,
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I like that, which is similar to like Pirkei Avot, which says, what is a truly wealthy person? Yeah, beautiful. Okay. He was happy with what he has. Okay, awesome. I like that. Alternatively, so this is the first point about wealth is if you put your reliance or trust in the wealth that you have, you'll realize that it's not always there. Another point is, alternatively, even if the riches themselves are not removed from him, his ability to enjoy the wealth will be withheld from him by God. As the wise man King Solomon said, God gives him no power to eat of it. If God doesn't want him to derive any enjoyment from his riches, why then does God leave it in his possession?
That's why sometimes you see so many miserable people who
Yeah.
have money.
And yet
They can't enjoy it.
they can't enjoy it.
Yeah. I see that in Ollie Stones.
He will be with him as a deposit, so that he will guard it from harm until the time that it will be returned to the one who is deserving of it and for whom it was meant. So, meaning, why would God leave it to him? It's really just to give it to the right person at the right time. This concept that sometimes a person is given wealth solely for the purpose of safeguarding it for another is supported by two verses. So again, like I said at the beginning, it's not going to be the whole book where we're bringing a bunch of, at least not in the whole introduction, that we're bringing a bunch of sources, but he's bringing such an important statement, such a heavy statement, that when you put your trust in things other than God, then you're removing that providence. And because God, and it's not even a punishment. God is saying, if you're putting your trust in that doctor, so then go let that doctor be the one to save you. So now he's going to bring two verses that sometimes a person has wealth only to safeguard it until it's time to be given to another person. As it says, and to the sinner, God gives the urge to gather and amass wealth, meaning God gives him the ambition and he's getting great wealth, but to give to the one who is good before God. As it says, the wicked man will prepare and the righteous man will use it, and the innocent will divide the money among themselves. The verse speaks about the wicked merely preparing for the righteous. The blind, wicked person does not derive any benefit from his wealth. So we discussed two possibilities of what might happen to a person who relies solely on his wealth. Number one, he might lose it. Number two, even if he retains it, he will not be able to enjoy it. Now, the author goes further and says that sometimes not only is he not able to enjoy his wealth, but the wealth itself causes bad things to befall him. So, this is going to be a third point. It is possible that his money will be the cause of his misfortune, as well as the cause of the destruction of his soul. Sometimes money can be the source of a person's physical and spiritual downfall. Let's just read the cause of a little commentary here. Wealth, the cause of his misfortune. I think this is at the bottom of page 10, below the line. Wealth is often a reason for arrogance and a feeling of superiority, which leads to sinful acts of betrayal of God. As it states, and he will add to your silver and gold, then your heart will become arrogant and you will forget the Lord your God. I think we could all relate to this idea that the more a person has, the more arrogance it leads, and the feeling of being greater than others because of the wealth that he amassed. And when you have that sense of arrogance or superiority, oftentimes it leads to inappropriate sinful behavior and also betraying God. So sometimes what the is going to make is having the wealth. Not only are you having it only to safeguard it for someone else, or not only is it something that will eventually be lost if you don't have trust in God, but sometimes it's actually the cause of a person's hardships. As the verse says, there is a sickening evil that I have seen under the sun. It's a famous verse from Solomon. Riches hoarded by their owner to his own misfortune. Until now, the author elaborated on the first spiritual advantage of Habitachon, namely that it causes a person to feel at ease, a person who relies on other people for his own talents or wealth will always worry that his success will not last. So this is the end of this discussion, that a person could have wealth, but if you don't have that bitachon, it's not going to last, either because it's the cause of the of their misfortune, or because they will lose it, or because they're just safeguarding it for some
So
things or someone else. Yeah,
can I ask a question to see if this will happen in the future? Will the book talk about honorable or honest ways to gain wealth? You know, if we're honoring God and
absolutely,
blessing
absolutely.
others, because this is not taught in high school. Kids are just taught, oh, I want to be famous or I want to be
Yeah,
rich,
right.
but they're
Yeah,
not told how to amass it in a honorable, respectful, God honoring way and how to use it. So I don't know, is this book going to talk about that?
absolutely. I mean, the key of the book is to realize that it's all coming from God. And therefore, when you have that as your as your backbone, all the money you have is from Hashem. And therefore it doesn't lead to arrogance. If anything, it leads to more humility, like feeling of gratefulness that God is gifting me this to do the right things with it. God's putting his trust in me to do the right things. It's like the whole perspective is so different. And that's why, you know, the charity and giving 10% of one's earnings, for some people it's so automatic, because you know I think I've mentioned this before, and I found it so powerful. One of the big philanthropists, such a mensch of a guy. I never met him personally, but I've just heard him speak. His name is Mr. George Rohr, and I don't know exactly what he does, but I know he's very passionate about Chabad on campus for young students to have a connection to their roots. Um, anyway, someone asked him, "How do you encourage others to give, to be so generous like you are?" And like he couldn't understand the question. He's like, "I was raised with the understanding from his father, who was a survivor, that everything we have is a blessing of God. So God is saying, I'm giving you 90% of your earnings, of your wealth, to do whatever you want with. But 10% is the principle, meaning as long as you could do whatever you want with the rest, but the principle, 10% has to remain in the main pot." So he was saying that the charity for him is like the 10% principle, that the blessings come as a result. Um, I just saw, every week, my family, we watch a beautiful video of the Rebbe that is put together by GEM, which is the Jewish Educational Media. Any video you've seen of the Rebbe is probably by GEM. And they put out a weekly called Living Torah. And so every a Saturday night, after Havdalah, our family sits down and watches a 15, 16-minute video of the Rebbe. And this was all about the blessing of charity. That when a person, the key over to this point that the Rebbe was saying is that the only mitzvah where God says, test me on it, usually we can't test God. But there's one mitzvah where God says, the words in the prophet is, "B'chanuni na bezot," test me on this, and that's charity. So there was one of a Chabad rabbi. His name is Rabbi Mordechai Einbinder. He lives in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, and he says that their communities, they thank God, have built an incredible, um, large Jewish communities there. But there was times, I'm assuming it was the 80s, I think it was 88 or 89, where he says they were going through terribly hard financial times. And they met with one of the wealthy people in the community and poured out their soul and says what was going on. So and asked for a big sum of money. He didn't say how much, but I'm assuming it was in the millions. And the donor responded that, "I'm actually going through a very big business deal, and if the deal goes through, you could have that money that you asked for." Meaning it was so big that, yeah, I commit to that. So meaning you pray for me that the deal goes well, and I'll commit to that amount that you asked for to help the community. So Rabbi Eimander was thrilled, and he wrote right away to the Rebbe. He sent a fax about this incredible potential success in growing the community. And the Rebbe's response, I don't remember the exact words, and I encourage you to go to gem.tv and you can watch this video yourself, where the Rebbe like responded something like, is that our way? Like, make a deal with God that you give me a good business deal and then I'll give charity? The point, so he didn't understand what the Rebbe, the Rebbe wasn't so clear. The Rebbe says, like, is that our way? Like, is that how you make a deal with God? So he asked one of his mentors, what does the Rebbe mean? And the mentor said, the Rebbe is saying that if you have your trust in God, tell him if he has trust in God, he should give the charity first, and then the deal will go through. And the guy agreed to it, and the deal went through. And but like, I think it was such a beautiful idea where, like Lynn, going back to your point, where it was such a premise, I think that person had to be educated, and it's hard for me to even describe because I'm not at the level of trust. But when you're so sure that the blessing will come as a result of my charity, that's an incredible level of trust where you're giving money knowing that you'll have the ability to make good on it because of that of that blessing. Anyway, I was watching it with our family, and I loved the teaching. All right, so that will put us to page 11, and there's a bottom line at the bottom here. There's two bottom lines on page 10 and 11, so we'll just conclude with that. On page 10, on the bottom, it says, understand your wealth and don't let it become an impediment. I love that. And just the last one we just read was, your wealth is transient, God is constant. These bottom lines are really nice. Okay, that will end today's class on Shar Habitachon. Any last questions before we end? I do encourage you to get the book because it may be easier to follow along because I'm skipping some of the commentaries at the bottom. I do encourage you to read the commentaries, but I think it'll take us too long to go through each one. Okay, everyone have a great day. And oh, Lynn, do you have a different style? Or you're muted, so I just can't hear what you're saying, but I'm seeing the book. It looks different.
I ordered the paperback because the
Oh,
other one
perfect.
wasn't available and it was very small, but now the
Ah,
big one is available, so I ordered the bigger one, but
ah,
this is able to carry, but you're going to also need to take a magnifying glass with you
yeah,
too.
yeah. Okay, cool. I'm glad the other one's available. Was it on Amazon or Kahas? Where did you buy it?
I got it on Amazon, but it was on the other website, but on Amazon I didn't have to pay shipping. So
So maybe you could return it. Is that the paperback?
I'm going to use it. I'm going to keep it in my car because it's small enough. I can just have it with me, and
Awesome.
I'm
I love
waiting for
that.
somebody. I can read a little pasuk. So yeah,
I
so I
love
just
that. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and
thank
looking
you.
forward to next week.
Yom Tov.
Bye.